So my name is Shona Ferguson, and I am an environmental data scientist and a data steward at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology at the Edinburgh site. UKCH is an environmental research institute with over 600 researchers based at our 4 sites in the UK, and we tackle key environmental challenges such as climate change, pollution and biodiversity loss. So we have a lot of historical data sets sat on our servers at UKCH from maybe the past 20, 30, 40 years. And we have 3 options of what we can do. We can either bin it all, delete it, there, problem solved. Or we can let it fester there and never do anything with it. Or we can rescue it. So why would we rescue it? So historical data sets provide unique records of environmental conditions that cannot be reproduced. We can't go back in time to the time where these data were collected and recollect them again. They are the foundation for new research, so they can lead to new hypotheses and new disciplines. And the growing AI and machine learning demand requires large and high quality data sets to improve model accuracy, and preserving and making data sets accessible prevents data loss in the long term. So why are we trying AI other than that it fixes every problem? So our manual workflows for this work are quite slow and expert heavy. So we're trying to use AI to accelerate the process a bit and reduce the subjectivity. And the main thing we want to look at is, can AI accelerate data rescue without compromising scientific integrity? So a bit about the methodology. An overview is that I rescued a small data set that was collected around 20 years ago, and it was in legacy Excel format on our servers. It needed cleaned and it needed metadata and supporting documentation added. The data is now published, and as part of this work, we used LLMs to repeat this process to see how they compare to what I did manually. So the data itself were cloud and rain chemistry data from a retired field site called Bobeat, which was used to continuously monitor and model cloud and rain chemical composition at high elevation. It's high value data with strong reuse potential, and it's irreplaceable. So this is a little screenshot of the original data from before they were cleaned and everything. They were in non-machine readable format, legacy Excel. They have a bit of a busy structure. As you can see, the column headings are sort of split over several rows. Some columns have units and some don't. We've got some formulas that are not resolving properly. We've got some notes attached to different cells and everything. Yeah, so we had it in that state, and we have ensured that there was no sensitive data in this spreadsheet before doing this project, so that no sensitive data would be used to train AI models. So if you see any right here, no, you didn't. So my manual methodology went a bit like this. I did a pre-assessment of the data where I identified the most recent up-to-date relevant files. And then when I had identified those files, I then constructed a report assessing the data against 18 different criteria. Then I cleaned the data set using an R script to make it interoperable and reusable. I then conducted a detailed quality check to check for any errors, missing data, the temporal and spatial resolution, all that kind of thing. An important part of that quality check was to contact the original researchers, who are actually retired now, but were very nice and replied to all my emails and were very helpful. So that was great. Then I created supporting documentation to go alongside the data and assessed the data against my original framework of 18 criteria again and published it. Another thing to note about these data were that there was basically no metadata stored with them. So all those column names and everything, there was no descriptions, no clear description of it. So I mostly used associated publications and talking with the original researchers, and that QR code leads to the published data set there. So for the AI methodology, I created 17 LLM prompts based on some of the steps of my manual methodology. For the sake of this exercise, I didn't fine-tune the LLM prompts an awful lot because I wanted to look at how the LLMs would perform without rigorous context, because regularly in data rescue, the humans don't have rigorous context, so we don't have anything to give to the LLM. The models I used were Copilot GPT 5.5 and Claude Sonnet 4.6. And in the interest of reproducibility, I've only used the free versions of each LLM. I created a grading system to score the models based on 4 metrics for each task. So The prompts I created were in these sort of categories. So I did code generation. I did a simple code generation task where the LLMs were just asked to make a R script that would read a folder structure and tell me all the file names, all the file paths, all the file sizes and everything. And then I did a more complex code task where they were asked to clean the data, just make a big long R script that cleaned the data. I also asked them to create that comprehensive assessment of the data I was talking about with the 18 criteria. I asked them to search the internet for associated publications and for the most appropriate repository to publish the data in, and I asked them to write supporting documentation for the data. So the evaluation metrics I used were accuracy, how correct were the responses I got, completeness, was there anything missing out of the responses I got, efficiency, how much time was saved compared with the manual effort. So for this one, I was comparing manual to using LLM first and then human QC of the LLM output. And then usability, was the output immediately usable or did it require a bit of a rework? And I scored each of these out of 5 for each task and then averaged them at the end. It did cross my mind to get the LLMs to evaluate their own outputs. And then I would have to get them to evaluate their own evaluation. And then we get into a bit of inception territory. So I didn't do that. So here are some of my key findings. So for estimated efficiency gains, my fully manual process took around 18 days of full-time work in total, although this was spread over a much larger time period because there was communication with researchers and communication with the data center and things like that. The hybrid LLM human QC version would have taken approximately 12 days. This is an estimate because I didn't go through the entire human QC process with each LLM output, partly because I have more knowledge now than I would have if I'd have done this without having done it manually first. So the estimated total amount of time saved is approximately 6 days of full-time work, and gains were most evident with constructing a framework-based assessment of the dataset, writing supporting documentation, and code generation. So, drumroll, the best LLM is, it depends! What a classic science answer. So if we have a little look at my evaluation metrics, so this is the average across all 17 tasks that I asked them to do. So for Copilot, unfortunately came last in every category. ChatGPT came best in usability and second in all the others, and then Claude did best. So I found that performance does vary significantly between the different models. Claude was generally more accurate and scientifically robust across the board. ChatGPT was more consistent, structured, and usable outputs. So their outputs were usually ready to use, had nice tabular outputs and things like that. And Copilot was a lot more variable. Sometimes it was insightful, but sometimes it was less reliable. So tasks where the LLM showed the least variance in performance were where I had provided really structured frameworks in my prompts. So this is an example of that. So this was my assessment of a data set before rescue and after rescue. So I gave it these 18 criteria. So the name of the criteria, I gave it guiding questions for each criteria. And I also gave it point grade descriptors from 1 to 5 to help it score each of the criteria. So the green ones here, you can see they've agreed with my manual assessment. The yellow ones, they're diverged slightly. This shows that there are ways to obtain more standardized outputs and force consistency between different models. I would point out as well just that some of the variance isn't necessarily that the LLM was wrong. My point grade descriptors do have a little bit of subjectivity in them. For instance, associated publications might have a 4 for if there's many associated publications and a 3 if there's few. So there is a bit of subjectivity. If you got 5 humans to do it, they'd probably come up with slightly different scores as well. So there's every chance I need to sort of fine tune my point grade descriptors a little bit. And this is just a little pretty Claude output that I got from that prompt where it gave me a nice tabular output with some color coding, which was great. So overall, where I found that large language models do add value are in summarization and structuring of data, drafting metadata, identifying file issues, generating code scaffolds, so not necessarily getting to a perfect code script in one go, but giving me a scaffold that I could work off of, interpreting tabular patterns, and where they didn't add so much value were in scientific correctness, context-specific interpretation, edge cases in messy data, and literature searches. And fun fact, my Claude literature search for associated publications was very sassy, and the first two results it gave me were my own dataset that I had published and my own paper that I had published. So in all this, what is an LLM talk without some hallucinations? So we've got at the top here, we've got an instrument that does exist in the world but was not used for these data at all. That was in the supporting documentation. On the right there, we've got some worksheet names that do not exist and were not in the Excel file. At the bottom there, we've got a temporal resolution being events-based. It was actually weekly, but was approximately weekly because environmental data are what they are, so it's not a continuous time series. So the LLM thought it was events-based. And then here, so you might remember me saying the data is from the Bowbeat field site. So one of the codes that they use in the data files is BBR. There's nothing actually in the data file that says Bowbeat explicitly. And so without any context, the LLMs have just created some field sites based on that code. So we've got Beanaburst, I think is how you pronounce it, which is a mountain in the Cairngorms. And we have Blackburn, which is in Lancashire. So if you knew nothing about these data, these are not obvious errors. You could easily think that those were plausible, and that does make them dangerous. Arguably, you could blame some of these on my prompting, and I wouldn't blame you. But realistically, as I say, in data rescue, we often don't have the context to give to the large language model. So a bit about scientific understanding. It is uneven across the board. LLMs can mimic expertise, but be careful in assuming that they have true domain reasoning. So these are some examples from the supporting document that Claude made for me. They do. I was actually surprised when I saw these because I thought, that's pretty good. I don't know where they've got all that from. And then I thought, so they've got the calculation for non-marine sulfate. They've got the calculation for sample depth from sample volume. They've got some information on the instrumentation, and they've got information on the process that the data was monitored to find. And then I thought, I wonder if what Claude has done is found my supporting documentation that I've already published alongside this dataset. And that's where it's got that information from. So I can't guarantee that that is what has happened, but that is what I think might have happened there. So across that, the sort of scientific inaccuracies and the hallucinations, human expertise does remain essential. For validating scientific interpretations, resolving ambiguous variables and units, interpreting true missing data from structural absence, so where there's just empty columns and things, to not see that as true missing data, and confirming metadata and provenance and final quality checking of the data, particularly when it's a very niche scientific domain. There really needs to be human experts there to do the quality checking. So what have I learned overall about large language model prompting? So give as much context as you can to the model, provide LLMs with frameworks and structured systems to reduce the variance across different models. Specifically request that models don't guess and use evidence to back up their answers. And for one or two of them, I asked them to actually tell me what they didn't know rather than guessing what they couldn't. And be very clear with exactly what type of output you want from the LLM. Whether that's a table with 4 columns named this, put that all in your prompt. Some challenges I came across were that freely available Claude has a limit of how many messages you can exchange in a 5-hour window. So if I gave it a really chunky prompt, it would do it for me, and then it would be like, come back at 5 a.m. And I'd be like, right. And there was a mix of consistency with different output formats. So sometimes I had really verbose outputs, sometimes they were tables. Yeah, there was just a mix across the board. Limitations, I only used one small dataset to test this, and the LLM prompts were only run once each, so I couldn't draw conclusions on consistency of the LLM outputs being asked the same question several times, and only the free versions of the models were tested. So my main conclusions are that you can save a lot of time, in this case about 30% of time. LLMs perform strongly on structured tasks, but not so much with scientific uncertainty. The hallucinations are subtle, but they are significant and they are important, and model choice does matter. And the main takeaway here is that LLMs are powerful accelerators, but not replacements for human expertise. And you can sort of tell I was losing my mind a bit by this point when I was making this slide. But I would recommend best practice is a hybrid human-in-the-loop workflow, which gives the benefit of efficiency gains, but it doesn't lose that vital scientific integrity that we need. And the main impact are there are vast quantities of inaccessible scientific data that LLMs could help to make available faster and hopefully on a larger scale. Further research I'd like to do here, I'd like to assess consistency across different kinds of data formats, maybe different scientific domains. I'd like to try using LLM APIs in my R code, which I learned a lot about yesterday. So I'd like to apply some of that knowledge here. And I'd also like to look into the carbon footprint of this approach versus the completely manual approach to see what the difference is there. If anybody else has any idea of what I can do with this and better tools and different AI approaches, please do come and speak to me because, yeah, I'm really interested and I'm just getting started with it. And so thank you very much for listening. This QR code here is to the published data, and this other QR code is to the paper where I detail my manual methodology. Hopefully they work. If they don't, let me know. Thank you very much.